1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Everyone set? Okay, we will go ahead and get started here. I'd like to call to order the October 18th, 2021 regular board meeting of the State College Area School District Board of Directors. If you could please rise with me for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone who is here with us this evening, as well as those of you who are viewing remotely. Board members, with an agenda before you, are there any changes to the agenda as presented? Okay. Seeing none then, before we get started, I would like to share recognition for two members of our board for their long-term service and dedication to our school district and community. And we have some certificates for them from the Pennsylvania School Board Association. So I am proud to recognize Jim Leas and Scott Fazzard for their service to the State College Area School District Board of Directors. Jim has served the district for 12 years and Scott has served for 8. So on behalf of PSBA, the board, and the district, we'd like to thank you for your service and for bringing your energy, your talent, and your values to the guidance of youth and public education in Pennsylvania. So thank you very much. Okay, at this time, Dr. O'Donnell will review some of the housekeeping items related to our hybrid format.
So thank you to Jim and Scott. I know that you'll be moving into the Alumni Association of our board here in the next couple of months, and we'll have time to reflect before you do so. So thank you. Thank you, Amber. For our audience this evening, 30 minutes will be provided at the beginning of the meeting for public comment for items related to board business that are not on the action items portion of the agenda. If additional time is necessary, the board may consider reopening public comment after board business is completed or during the next meeting. Each individual will be limited to comments of 2 minutes as time permits for items related to board business that is not on the action items section of the agenda. For action items, public comment will be held just prior to voting on that item as required by school code. This approach also allows for comments to be informed by the presentation and board's conversation of the respective item. During the meeting, the IT help desk is available if those viewing remotely encounter technical difficulties. You may email itsupport@scasd.org or give them a call at 814-231-7743. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. O'Donnell. At this time, I'd like to call on our board secretary for a roll call of board members present.
Dr. Bader?
Here.
Ms. Bedell? Here. Ms. Brandt?
Here.
Ms. Concepcion?
Here.
Dr. Duffy?
Here.
Mr. Fazzard?
Here.
Mr. Leo?
Here.
Ms. Sidney?
Here. Okay, thank you. At this time, we'll move on to the superintendent's update. Dr. O'Donnell?
Thank you. I have some communication items, and then I'll highlight the update and then open up to any questions. I believe Gene Knaus is online with us to help field any questions regarding the update. First, I'd like to congratulate or thank the board as well as our State College Area School District Foundation and its director, Paul Ovett. Obviously, the board members who were able to join us, including many district foundation and community members who made the Memorial Field celebration last Friday a smooth success, including kindergarten night. Not counting the exciting game that unfortunately resulted in a last-minute outcome that wasn't in our favor. Alums Larry Beans, Galen Drablis, and Dan Hobbaker attended with their families. Between the first and second quarter, they were honored for their significant gifts toward renovating the stadium. All told, about $1.7 million in gifts, and I want to thank them again for their generosity and support. Second, congratulations to State High student Alanis Presidio Higgins for successfully organizing 2 workshops with the cast of the touring theatrical work Cartography for the high school's advanced performing arts class and members of our thespians troupe. Alanis worked with faculty member Jill Campbell and Penn State Center for Performing Arts to bring Cartography cast members to the high school last week. State High students then attended a performance of the show at the university 2 days later. So nicely done, Alanis. In regard to a fall sports update, although we're having such large turnouts on Friday evenings at Memorial Field to see the team and our band, we have many other students involved this fall in extracurriculars, especially our many athletic programs. Our teams are winding down their seasons in the near future, and many are having success. as they look forward to the postseason playoffs. So congratulations thus far, and good luck to our teams. They head down the home stretch of their seasons. Just a quick note that this Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. at the tent located adjacent to our Delta building on the north side of our Westerly campus, the board is having a coffee with the community, so 6 p.m., about 7 p.m.-ish. Please stop by and check in. Our board will be available, as well as several members of our district leadership team to have conversations and hear what's on your mind. Finally, I'll shift to the pandemic update that's attached to your agenda. Since the first day of school, we highlight the different cases that have been reported to us. Then also I noted, so it's 105 positive student cases, and there's a breakdown of elementary and secondary, as well as vaccinated, unvaccinated. Thanks. I need to have a little more stamina to stay up close here. Thanks, Lynn. In regard to our vaccines, 2,038 students, that's just updated today, are confirmed to be vaccinated after voluntarily uploading their cards. They represent about 59% of the students who are eligible. Our district continues to work with local medical providers to prepare for a vaccine clinic to help children ages 5 through 11 and their parents. We hope to announce the details of that clinic following vaccine approval for this age group, and we're in collaboration with CVIM as well as local medical providers. As you can see, there's further information included regarding close contacts, and unfortunately, obviously, when students have to quarantine, that we know that's an impact on families. And obviously, for our older students, we're seeing a lot less students required to quarantine because of the vaccine. In regard to employees, we also have our vaccination rates included there. Tonight's agenda, there's also a couple incentives or supports for employees who aren't able to work remotely. We also have a note in regard to that we're not in the same situation as Penn State after their recent announcement requiring the vaccine. And then finally, we shared a note regarding our recent concerns related to Park Forest Middle School and some of the actions we've taken with guidance from our health and safety team. So I believe Jean's with us, and I'll open it up if any board members have any questions of us at this time.
Any questions?
I just want to thank Jean and all of our nurses and the support staff with them, helping to manage obviously all of our health rooms, because almost every student's in person, but also they are the go-to team for continuing to manage all the contact tracing. We appreciate their approach to our families and the challenge that it presents, like I said, when students are quarantined, and that obviously has happened to a number of students. So we're hopeful that the vaccine moves forward, and we'll share that information and help families get access in a quick manner. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Thank you. And thank you to Jean for all the work that you've done as well. And this is a really helpful amount of data here that's present in this report as well. So, any other questions? Okay. All right. Then we'll move on to the legislative update. Lori, do you have any items for that?
The only thing that I'll say, and Dr. O'Donnell may be able to say something about this. Dr. O'Donnell joined superintendents from Keystone Central and the Shannon Valley in a Zoom session for the area media to address what school participants described as a flawed system of charter school funding, hurts districts and ultimately hurts taxpayers. This is part of an effort to advocate for legislation on charter funding reform. All the other things that I talked about last week are still where they are and haven't moved forward yet. So.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. I just think to reiterate in regard to my comments, as well as what I shared with the state today related to what the Department of Education requested for regulation additions, it really isn't anything against getting rid of charter schools. It's really about making the system better. And so, like you're required as elected board members to submit documentation to the Ethics Commission annually, that's an example of what is proposed for charter boards, which I think when we're dealing with public resources, that makes sense. So I just want to be clear that, my remarks do relate to similar transparency and accountability that doesn't exist in that part of public education. And I just think that I need to be clear, because it's not saying do away with the choice model. These are ideas that can help make it better. And since we experienced a situation with a charter school, unfortunately, that wasn't providing required services to students with disabilities, we saw how that impacted kids. And I think if some of these requirements that are upon you were within the charter world, I don't think we would have seen that situation. So I just want to clarify that, and also appreciate our board's involvement, because my remarks do jibe with what you approved as a resolution last year, and I just appreciate your guidance in that arena. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your advocacy on that topic. Okay, Gretchen, do you have a COG report tonight?
I do not. The general forum has not met since our last meeting.
Okay. Then at this time, we do have time on our agenda for public comment. Each individual would be limited to comments of up to 2 minutes as time permits for items related to board business that are not on the action items portion of the agenda. For action items, public comment is held just prior to voting on that item as required by the school code. And at this time, I will open the floor for anyone here first in attendance who would like to make a public comment. Okay, not seeing anyone who's here looking to make a public comment. Is anyone who's viewing remotely interested in making a public comment? Okay, Clara Strausser, I see your hand raised. If you would like to, if you'd like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, then you'll have 2 minutes to speak. I'm not sure if the audio is working. Okay, just a moment.
I cannot understand what you're saying. I cannot understand you, and you're not loud enough.
Oh, Clara,
Can you hear me? You're very muffled. Your voices are muffled, and you're not loud enough.
Clara, would you like to?
Or was it just related to the audio?
Now you're echoing.
I know. Okay. Is anyone else who's here, who is viewing remotely interested in making a public comment? Okay, see? Oh, yeah. If you're viewing via Zoom, you'll get much better audio if you turn the audio on from CNET. The CNET feed is a lot better audio than the Zoom feed, so you can stay logged on to Zoom, and you might want to mute your computer and then just watch the CNET stream. And you'll get good audio that way. Okay. No other public comments then? Okay. Then at this time, I'd like a motion to approve the routine approval listing as presented on the agenda.
So moved.
Leah, second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on items related to, that are part of the routine approvals? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Vidal? Yes. Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Hazard?
Okay, that item has passed. Moving on to action items, there's a motion to approve the proposed new policy, Policy 12, Board Superintendent Responsibilities, and this can be found in Attachment 6A.
So moved.
Second.
And that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion related to this policy? Laurel?
Yes, thank you. Is this, how do I know when it's on?
It's on. I can
It's
see the
on?
red light from my angle.
Okay, because I'm not hearing anything, but I'll assume it's on. Thanks. I'm just going to read the notes that I sent into the policy committee. I'm sorry they were late, but I figured it was still shorter than my actually being there with complications. This was regarding this policy, which first was brought to the September 7th Policy Committee. That was the first I even realized it was coming up anytime soon. And I couldn't attend that because the meeting was scheduled on Rosh Hashanah and my family observes that holiday. So I couldn't attend it. At that time, it was said that the reason for bringing it up is that we have a fairly experienced board. It seemed timely, it would be good to codify how things are now. There was a little bit of feedback on the discussion. I listened to the audio of it. And it was also stated that there was still opportunity for input, and there would need to be a few discussions about this, because I assume because it was new. Also that it had been worked on by the superintendent and the president and vice president over a year ago, so it wasn't that new. It was brought to the last school board meeting.
Over a year ago? Yeah, I'm not sure about
Before the
over.
pandemic.
Oh, I think we had discussed it prior to that, but not that we didn't work on the draft prior to that.
Okay, that wasn't
That was
clear to
more
me.
recently.
That meeting, there was some feedback, and it was incorporated into the draft that was brought to the policy committee, and that is what I was commenting on. And I wrote, it'd be helpful for understanding this policy to have a full board discussion that includes specific examples. There was a good list of example situations used at the PSBA training that Amber and I attended when we joined the board. If Amber can't find it, I'll look when I get home. I couldn't find it. Some examples from past board superintendent situations could also be good to discuss what went well and where were their problems. With at least a third of the board changing in December, we should invite all candidates to participate and delay voting on this until after the election, or postpone further detailed discussion until then. If a majority of the current board wants to indicate our consensus on this relationship and responsibilities for future reference, we could use a resolution format that both offers our reasoning and conclusions. And I then listened to the policy committee meeting on last week that I could not attend because I was out of town. And it's very clear that several board meeting, there can be differences of opinion on this, that several board meeting members feel that this is exactly a good time to do it because of our experience, that we're codifying what's present. However, I will say that as someone who, when I ran for the board the first time, was looking at a board that people often said voted like this, and there should be more public discussion, less centralization, more transparency, and who felt that very strongly. I know that, speaking for myself, if that board, good people, committed people, had decided less than a month before the election to codify the board superintendent relationships as they saw the situation with no input from candidates, I would have been miffed, and I would have wondered why the rush and what was attempted to be put into there. So that goes to the optics of doing it now. It is hard to even read through and have ideas of where some things came from because different boards work differently. There are some boards around the state where they approve every single person who signs up to use the facility. We don't do that here. We're too big. There are boards that routinely approve all teacher trips and presentations. We don't do that. So there can be differences of how things are done. The one big thing that I'm concerned about with the actual substance of this is the strategic planning, where the role of the board is pretty much to approve and to participate along with the community. That's different than it was when I first joined the board, when it was much more interactive, it seemed to me, the planning, and then some of the ones I saw from around the state. So that is a specific concern I have.
Laurel, can you explain that? Because I'm not sure what you mean by it was different when you joined the board, because I was here then.
Right, and the memos that we got from you explaining what you were looking at, what you were thinking of in terms of how to do the strategic planning and all, were much less than we got the subsequent time.
I'm
share
not
it back
sure
to you.
about that,
Well,
because the last time you were involved soup to nuts.
We were involved once the facilitator was hired and the dates were set.
You were on the
And the
steering team.
invitations. And the invitations to the steering committee, we were invited to be on the steering committee.
And you were on the steering team.
Yes, but all
You
the
attended all
planning
those
for the
meetings.
strategic planning.
Well, the time prior, it
Well,
worked
I can
almost
share the
identically.
emails back
'cause I
to
was
you.
here.
It
So-
seemed to me there was much more important.
Thanks, Laurel. I'm curious to know what you don't like in this policy, because I think it's a much more transparent way of doing a job description, which we've never, ever done in 10 years.
Yeah.
I just would like to know what you think shouldn't be in here.
Well, I would want that discussed more, and as I said, it's very hard to even put, the example that kept coming back to mind for me was block scheduling, where there was some disagreement among people about was it administrative or governance. And that's an honest disagreement. But without having some firm examples and really discussing it, it's hard to understand how this works in practice other than the way we do things all along.
Okay, I appreciate that example, but who else on the board disagreed with our high school principal at the time and block scheduling on the board than you?
I actually was in favor of block scheduling, having been through such a discussion on a site committee at a previous district, as I said at the time.
Well, I disagree with what you're saying right now, because I could probably find your emails on that.
Well, I felt the board should be involved in the discussion, yes. But I was
Okay.
a block scheduling advocate, so, at
Not
least
here
for
you
the time
weren't.
period,
Not here you weren't.
at least for the time being. So it's more about that, and then the optics that I really
Laurel,
do think.
I just want to go back to the strategic planning, because I think I must be reading it differently than you are, because it does, on page 6, it says the board participates in the strategic plan development, including the establishment of annual goals, which come from that strategic plan, and we are the ones who approve the multi-year strategic comprehensive plan. So ultimately, it is our strategic plan as a board.
I may have
Although the
missed a
community
change.
participates
I knew
in
that-
it,
I
it's
knew
still
that
our
goals were
plan.
added. I may have missed that word development showing up, and if so, I apologize, and that is important, I think.
Okay.
I saw that the goals had been added, and I appreciated that, so I may have missed that the word changed, I may not have seen it in blue. But again, thinking of myself as a candidate, I do think it's important that the people who are running for the board be aware that these are ongoing discussions, and you'll be coming into a board, at least a third of our board will be new, that these are ongoing discussions about the proper role and responsibilities of the board. And as it says in the overview quite correctly, ultimately it is on the board, but we hire the superintendent. We don't want to be messing in every little thing. And there are things at extremes. Should we be talking about what color badges should be? No. But something like block scheduling, we were involved in the change in the school day timing.
But I don't think there's
Things like
anything
that.
here that would indicate that a decision such as block scheduling could not include board involvement.
It doesn't.
Right.
It also doesn't say it would include board involvement.
So
just
I'm not
saying
sure what
that
you're
it-
asking for then.
What I'm saying is that without having had a full board, I'm sorry. Okay. That actually, yeah, I still can't hear it. Without having had the full board discussing more than once after a somewhat challenging policy discussion, vote, without having had the full board discuss this and how it plays out in real life, I think it is too early to be doing something like this.
What do you mean by, I'm sorry, I know Lori had her hand up. I'm just not understanding what you mean about a challenging policy discussion, because my recollection is that David had some specific suggestions on a little bit of language in one area when we discussed it at the full board table. So we sent it back to committee in order to resolve those minor issues. I don't think there were not massive revisions made to
No.
the policy whatsoever. So
I
that was the
wasn't
reason
referring to
why
that.
we opted to bring it back for a vote, because there was only minor changes recommended at the first reading of the full board.
I
You
wasn't
expressed
referring
some
to that.
trepidation about the timing, but there was no major revisions suggested by anyone of the actual policy, aside from whether it was appropriate or the timing of when to pass it.
That wasn't what I was referring to. I was referring to the fact that we passed 2 policies related to students who identify as transgender before getting onto the discussion of this.
there was adequate time in policy committee to discuss it. I'm just
That was on
perplexed.
Rosh Hashanah.
Yes, and it was unfortunate that that happened and you weren't able to attend, but you're not a member of that committee,
right.
so it wasn't rescheduled.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And I said that was fine at the time. No,
I think that was about 6 weeks ago, though.
Yeah, it was quite a period of time ago. And we had asked at the full board table for feedback to be provided
and
prior
it
to
was,
the policy.
and the specific suggestion I made was incorporated, as were some of the other ones that had been made in committee. So I wasn't saying that that wasn't done.
Okay, I just
That
used the
was
word
done.
substantive discussion, and so I
I'm
find
sorry.
that perplexing.
I was referring to what happened before we got around to, earlier in the board meeting,
Okay.
before we got to discussing this. So
But
I
every
at least
subject
felt
was
the
given
sense of
full and appropriate consideration and discussion.
We discussed this for a good 15 minutes, I think. Lori?
So my thinking about this policy, and I think we talked about it, we mentioned it this way in the policy committee meeting, is that it's intended to be a broad roadmap for how things work so that, and frankly, I think having this laid out will be incredibly useful for new board members, speaking as the most recently elected person to just simply be able to refer to this one place and then to go other places to get details. I just see it as a high-level summary of the big ideas that the superintendent and the board work on together. And I just think it's going to be incredibly useful for new people coming on, even just to have a sense for the duties and responsibilities and how those things get managed. And I think it even provides opportunities for people to know what questions to ask. You know, when you come into a new role like this, to paraphrase, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And I think this allows you to, an insight into things that you don't realize you don't know about. So I think it's broad enough and yet offers nuance enough that will allow people to have an understanding about how to engage. So, I think it's quite appropriate for what it's intended, what its original intention was. So that's all I'll say.
Scott?
Is this on? I have no idea whether this is on. Pardon me? Oh, okay, so
Good thing you asked.
So, I agree with what Lori said. Laurel, I completely, understand and recognize your points of concern. I've been on the board for almost 8 years, and since the very first board development meeting after I got on, Bob has been talking about codifying the relationship between the board and the superintendent to provide structure and roadmap and to provide some sense of, okay, where are we, and and how do things work, and whose responsibility is whom's, et cetera. The board sets policy, so the board can also change policy. So it's not like anything that we're doing ends up being immovable or cannot be adjusted in the future if a future board feels that a relationship is slightly different based on that board dynamic, whatever it might be. So similar to, as I said, agreeing with Lori, I think having something now, codifying this and having something that does give a new board structure, at least as a starting point. That new board, to your point, a third of the, is going to change over by a third at least. That is, I think, very helpful to that new board because it sets some parameters and expectations. So,
Gretchen?
I don't know if mine's on or not, but I'll assume it is. So I think this is a gift, actually, to new board members. We'd be gifting this because then they would not have to endure all of the lengthy meetings and conversations that we have over the past, since I've been here 6 years, and it's been a lot. And so I kind of found it funny, Laurel, when you said rushed, because I was like, oh my goodness, this is like years, in my perception. And so I do. I think it's a gift because not only because they don't have to deal with all of the lengthy conversations that, really got redundant, and I found it difficult to sit through all that. So that's why I'm saying this is a gift. But in addition to that, what Lori and Scott said, that it's like for them, it's going to be, this is such a funky setup, like with how the entire school board in Pennsylvania works with 9 and then the superintendent and who does what. And so there's so much to learn. And this document really lays it out very clearly, as Lori said, with the big ideas. So I think that it's going to be really helpful for them. I know that I would have found such a document very helpful when I stepped in. I just knew that everybody was arguing and not agreeing about what the roles are, but that's all I knew. But had I been able to see this to me seems pretty neutral, is more like descriptive than, assigning specific roles. It just seems very broad. And so I guess there's just a few things that I think, like the timing, I think is kind of perfect, because I would have loved to have had this gift. So I guess, everybody sees it, through their own lens, but that's how I have seen it. And I was just so appreciative to Bob and Amy and Amber for doing this, because after all the disagreements, and you all were able to come up with this, that at least at the policy meeting when it was discussed, there seemed to be consensus, like, wow, we finally dealt with this. This is finally going to get off our laps, and we can use it to be a high-functioning board in the future. So that was my take on it, and I just thought that I would share that.
Dan?
I guess the only other point I'd like to add, first I want to acknowledge, I should start by acknowledging Scott's and Lori's comments, and Gretchen's as well. And I want to acknowledge the hard work that went into it from board leadership and Dr. O'Donnell. I mean, this really covers a lot of territory. The basic fundamental structures within which we work, where we need to be able to align our efforts together and to collaborate and cooperate as effectively as possible. And this provides that opportunity. One of the things I want to say about this is a proposed policy, and should we approve this policy, it is not written in stone. It can be brought back to the policy committee at the very next meeting if there's a flaw in it that requires it to be adapted or to be modified in some way. So this is like any other policy. This is malleable, and it can be responsive to the need for change. And so I think that's an important piece to this. Another piece to this that's important from my perspective is I worked in the public schools for almost 35 years. And I knew there was a school board. I'd attended several meetings, but to actually serve as a school board member, one of 9 with others, I would comfortably say it took me 2 years to begin to get a sense of what is involved in this role and what the responsibilities are, and even to be able to read, to really make sense of this in a cold read. I can comfortably say it would have taken me 2 years to really understand the meaning of this, with the application of these principles. So essentially, I think it's fine for us to take action on it at this time, and to say out loud that this is a policy which can be revised as needed, and if it acquires or requires some tweaking in terms of its application to real life and real world events, we can do that. So I just think all those things are worthy of adding to this discussion.
Considering how many times we've revised 006 in the
Right.
time that I've been on the board,
Yeah, right.
it seems like,
Right.
it comes around every 3 or 4
every 6
months or
months or
something.
What do we need
Not
to
that we
another-
need to do this that often, but I
Exactly.
mean, it's just an example of a policy that we've continually revised in order to make it meet our needs, so.
Thank you.
Dan, I think to your point there, when we were trying to work on this, rather than just doing a superintendent job description, I think, and I'm looking in the room, and there's a fellow math teacher back there, and I think to distill down what I tried to do for kids in the classroom has some similarisms in this role with others that I work with, and taken a pretty complex relationship and try to make organization of it so that people can understand it. And I don't think this takes the sensitive issues, including some that Laurel mentioned, and fixes them. It doesn't make those any easier by any means. But I do think it clarifies the relationship a little bit. This is by no means us going into the level of detail of like a budget development process. But it does map out who has what key responsibilities in there, and gives you sort of a cliff notes of the relationship is what I think it does. And the disclaimer at the top that the board has the final authority, I think is most critical, because it's not by any means an attempt to say the superintendent's a voting member, because the role is not. And the word superintendent here really means the district leadership team, because there are things in here that I don't have the expertise to lead, even with my experience. I don't. I look to members of our leadership team in the district, several are here now, to lead those processes. But to make it simple enough to understand, rather than throw all those roles in here and try to explain that, wouldn't have been helpful. So I think when we really looked at trying to do this, that's what we were trying to do. Take a really complex organization, large organization, and boil down this important relationship. And I think as much to help the community as ourselves.
Yeah. And it's the ways in which the policy are structured really targets that dynamic relationship between the superintendent and the board. Each of those components, each of those roles is described in each of the areas involved. So under strategic planning, for example, there are board activities and superintendent activities, and they are is a dynamic between the two groups, if you will, two levels of the organization that are laid out in this in a very complementary way. I think it makes sense.
I think the other thing I want to point out is that there's not a lot of new material here, because each one of these areas, there are already existing policies within our board policy, manual that address each of these areas already. So, we weren't really reinventing the wheel in terms of what's in here. It's all consistent with existing policy. So, I guess an example, an easy example is the community engagement and relations. That's, really reflects what's already in policy on that item. Curriculum, textbooks, and other instructional resources, we have a policy on curriculum, and what's written here simply reflects what's in the curriculum policy. So each one of these areas that we pulled out as specific areas to highlight, there's already existing policy that this is consistent with the existing policy, so that was very intentional. So. Jim, I saw your hand raised too.
Thank you, Amber. Well, when I thought about this, I really like the way it's broken down into the sort of the areas of, the silos, if you want to say, and in some cases refers to not just the superintendent, but like Dr. O'Donnell said, superintendent or designee, because a lot of times these are handled by a leadership team. So when I think about policy, I think policy is often challenged at the edges, right? The sensitive cases that you spoke about, Bob, that, sort of in the gray area or whatever. But when I thought about, I thought about some very real examples over the years and looked at this policy and said, oh yeah, that's handled right here. Or, oh yeah, that's the superintendent's responsibility, and that's right there. And so almost every, what I'd call edge case that I could think about, people calling me up to open Mount Nittany Middle School gym for them, things like that, where okay, clearly that isn't a board responsibility, but everything I thought about over the years is sort of be like edge cases. Most of them were handled really well by the breakdown between the board or the superintendent, or co-responsibility. So I think this is pretty darn good, and I agree with Dan. I mean, I remember after I got elected, and I just felt overwhelmed the first couple months, and it did take me about 2 years till I really felt comfortable, and there was really a cadence around my learning and the meetings and the committee work and things like that, and so I think this, combined with some of the PSBA training, like that Ready, Set, Govern, or whatever they call it now, was really superb, and that combined with this, I think we'll get hopefully newer board members up to speed much more quickly than I had, you know. I mean, I know that we put in sort of a board orientation, you know, which wasn't available when I was on the board, or when I was coming onto the board. So I think that all these things are good, and this combined with PSBA, the board orientation, I think that'll be a really smooth onboarding for new board members.
Okay.
So I appreciate this policy, and I appreciate the work that board leadership and Dr. O'Donnell. And a lot of these edge cases in the future will ultimately be resolved by a consultation between board leadership and the superintendent. So I have no fear that, you know, things will be outside of this policy and cannot possibly be resolved.
Right.
Because I think we have good mechanisms existing for that.
We can talk about it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So, yeah, this is good. Thanks for your time on this.
Jim's on record saying it'll be smooth for the incoming.
Laurel?
Yeah, I did forget at the beginning to thank you for the work on it, and I do appreciate that, because the general structure of having this grid at the beginning, I think, is very helpful in bringing things down. I also think it's very, very key what was said here, and that was the piece that had me so concerned for potential new board members, is why is this is this board setting things in stone? So I think Dan particularly, and maybe Scott also, I think everyone agreed that our policies do change as the needs change, and I think that's very important. I was very concerned that the way this came down and the timing of this, in with everything else we've been doing over the last month and a half, that it almost got lost and this sort of just appeared. So with that clarification, I really think that's critical. I thought that in terms of the substance, I thought the changes, especially on the community involvement piece, were very, very critical and important. And I did find what had concerned me when you asked about strategic planning, and it was that in the grid, it still says the board approves the strategic plan and the superintendent develops and guides the process and recommends the plan. That seemed more cut and dried than I would have had we had a board discussion. It still might have wound up this way, and that's where I felt that it would have been a more informed policy had we had some discussions about specific examples. Again, as Jim said, a lot of it is done at the edges in practice, and in practice things shift all the time. Things shift when there's a pandemic and an immediate decision has to be made, and you maybe can't consult the way you might otherwise, and I get that. My biggest concern was the optics of it, and with the clarification and overwhelming acknowledgement that this is not a set in stone, one and done forevermore, this is how everything must be always, policy, I'm more comfortable with it. It's still not the optics I would have chosen, but that's okay. I think the opportunity to clarify that is helpful for the community as well as our future board members.
Thanks, Laura. You know, we talked when I was meeting Amber, Amy, and then running things by the communication team for how it would flow about possibly pulling that grid out. You know, we left it in because I think it's like a thumbnail almost, although it's not complete clearly, and that's hence the list below. But for what it's worth, that was a discussion. My one thought, if the board did postpone it, which obviously the board can do that. That's not obviously I've requested some clarity, and I think this is a very public way to have that happen. I think with the transition of the board, we're going to immediately jump into things that are going to be decision points, let alone formulating new relationships and developing the board together. And there's no question when you come onto a board, you're put into a pretty quick time frame on making budget-related decisions and trying to figure out public education and the funding model, let alone what you're being asked to take action on, is the here and now. So if we did put it off, my concern would be that it would be put off for quite some time, and it would take us a while to get it back on the table, where this board has a lot of wisdom and experience. And you know, some of you referenced some of those experiences here. So thanks for your consideration.
And I guess my thinking too is I don't know that it would even be fair to ask new board members to work on a policy like this until they've had, a sufficient time to really, get to understand the workings of the organization from the inside a little bit more. So to my thinking, it makes sense to establish the policy now because, well, first of all, we've been talking about it for years. Second, there's nothing new in here. It's really all based on existing policy, but pulled together in a way so that it's easy to reference rather than having to go to all these different policies to look at what's provided in those policies. And I think, there's been many instances where, people in the community have asked any of us to, what kind of things that we're able to help them with. And a lot of the times, people have particular issues or concerns, and they will come to board members, and they're not necessarily something that any of us as an individual board member can do something about. We can point them to this for them to understand the role of the board. Often what we do is, point them to the appropriate administrator to resolve their concern. So anyways, I think it's good for the community to have something like this to reference. I think PSBA would probably be interested in this as a presentation at a future conference and a model for other school boards throughout the state. I think it's pretty consistent with the PSBA model for board governance as well. So David's not here to speak to that, but that I think was his impression from our discussions about it as well. So anyways, that's all, I guess. In terms of whether this can be revised, I joked before about 006 because it hasn't been very long since we voted on a new version of that, and it's back on our agenda again for information discussion. That was only a few months ago. So anyways, these things can be revised when necessary, so. Okay, anyone else? All right, then at this time, we'll take public comment on item A. If anyone who's here would like to make a public comment, they can introduce themselves, where they reside in the district, and then you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Peter Buck. I live in College Township. As a person to whom I guess I was referenced during this discussion as someone running for the school board, I would like to comment about it. So I was the chair of the Ferguson Township Board of Supervisors for almost 2 years, and before that I was the vice chair. When I came onto that board, I had the fortune of having a home rule charter that delineated the role of the manager. The role of the manager is very similar in its structure and its responsibilities to the role of the superintendent. You can go to section 3.03 of the Ferguson Township Code of Ordinances and read the home rule charter and the duties of the manager. During our training, it was very helpful for me and the 2 other board members who came on with me to work with the senior board members to understand the structure, which includes the roles of all of the staff, whether that would be the manager, superintendent, the finance director, right, et cetera, et cetera. I found that very helpful. And so I would just like to assuage any worry from this person who may end up serving on the board, that I don't see this as like the equivalent of, I don't know, hijacking the nomination and appointment of a Supreme Court justice or something like that. I think that we're okay. I personally and professionally trust the board to do something like this, especially considering what Dr. Bader, Ms. Concepcion, others have said, that what it does is it sort of aggregates the big ideas that are already existing in policy, delineates them, gives me or whoever wins a reference point, and then a way to work with the public, as Ms. Concepcion said, that says, that's not my duty, go to the superintendent or designee for that. So I just wanted to clarify at least one person's opinion who would be in a position that you all were discussing. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Is anyone else here who'd like to make a comment? If you could come up to the lectern and you can introduce yourself, and then you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, my name is Jackie Huff. Just very briefly, I wanted to say thank you to all the board members for being so mindful of the transition. As someone who may be serving on the board I would be comfortable with this policy passing tonight, but I really appreciate that you guys are so aware of the transition that's about to take place and so mindful and thoughtful about that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to make a comment on this item? Okay, then we will have a roll.
Online, anybody?
Oh, thanks, Dan. Is anyone online who would like to make a comment on this item? You can raise your hand. Okay, then we will have a roll call vote.
Ms. Zidney.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Vidal.
Yes.
Ms. Grant.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard.
Yes.
Mr. Leo.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Thank you. Item B is a motion to approve the 2020-2021 fund balance resolution. And this can be found in attachment 6B. We have Randy Brown and Donna Watson at the table with us. If anyone would like to make that motion.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. So questions and discussion on this item. Randy, did you want to go through the presentation maybe then?
It's up to the pleasure of the board. We went through our presentation at Finance Committee. We're in a very favorable status considering the economic times that we faced. And so we have a very fortunate opportunity to set aside additional dollars into our fund balance. And so if there's any questions, we'll be happy to answer them, or we can go through the presentation. It's your pleasure.
Okay. What do you all think? Any additional questions?
I had one little question, sort of, and this is partly because I haven't had, all right, I admit, I haven't chosen to attend Finance Committee meetings as of late.
One of the most exciting meetings.
Well, I did serve on that committee for a period of time, and I've taken a little hiatus. So I just wasn't clear, the fund balance designated for revenue loss to COVID, are we just establishing that now, or had we already done it before? And I know this makes me look really ignorant and not paying attention, but I don't recall.
Sure, no, we established that last year.
Okay.
And we had projected that we would be building on that this year. And later in the presentation and the information discussion, we talk about the fact that that was planned to help to offset the fact that we had those revenue losses and didn't increase taxes the last couple of years.
And aside from us saying we're using it for that, and we identified this need as being due to loss of revenue, there's no other ways we have to justify or document that, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's going to remain in the.
It's just kind of a squishy idea, like.
It's going to remain in the general fund, whereas in most years, prior to last year, your fund balance resolution would have been authorizing a transfer to the capital reserve fund, which has more restrictions.
Right.
The rationale for last year and then again this year would be that we would be setting aside those monies because our general fund revenue is expected to be lower than our expenses, not so much the case in this year or next year, but in some of the coming years. And so that gives the district, the board and the district the ability to manage that shortfall. And it does not mean that in future years that couldn't be transferred to capital, but once it is transferred to capital, it must be spent on capital. So it does provide us with flexibility, and we believe that that's the optimal option at this point in time.
And Randy, I know we can only have 8% in the unassigned balance, but we have no limit when we have given an assignment, right? Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that for the public.
And understand that you are going to be beginning, as was discussed with the last item, several of you will not be beginning, but the majority of you will be beginning a very in-depth budget process, which we're going to start talking about tonight, actually later this evening. And so so it's not like there still is a framework from which that money can be spent. It will be identified in the budget.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right, thank
Hopefully
you.
I'm up to speed now.
Any other questions? Okay, is there any public comment on this item? Okay, is there any public comment from the online? Okay, we will have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Liddell.
Yes.
Ms. Brand.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Okay, so that item has passed. Item C is a motion to approve the substitute teacher compensation plan for the remainder of the 2021-2022 school year, and this is shown in attachment 6C.
So moved.
Second? Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? We had a pretty in-depth conversation during the Finance Committee meeting on this. Scott?
So my only question is, really for the administration, and that is, does the establishment of a rate in this manner provide you the flexibility that you may need to respond to a changing environment in the future? In other words, is there additional flexibility that if we're doing this, and we're doing this now, is there additional flexibility that we can build into this consideration that allows you to be more reactive to the substitute teacher situation that we may find ourselves in the future as well as today?
Well, I think what we want to do, Scott, and you can see that we've made it less complicated than our last discussion. And we want it to be clear to our current substitutes. And if you approve this, we'll send this to them because you can see that we included them in the thinking here out of respect for their commitment. And also, we're going to get into the budget process and look to next year to see if this is helping. And if it's not along the way, we'll pivot and say, hey, we think we need to do something differently here. So to answer your question, we're not sure about next year, and we said that in committee. As far as this year goes, I think we need to roll this out and see how it goes. This is a substantive improvement to where we've been, much more respectful to people considering substituting. And I think the daily rate also, when you think of the local non-education opportunities, gets us to be a little bit more, as I said, respectful for people and their time and what they do as a substitute teacher. Although it doesn't include lesson planning, the grading that our faculty doing on every evening, it's still, they're going to spend a full day with our students and have to figure out different environments, different classrooms, and we're hopeful to improve upon our pool of substitutes than where we are now. So Randy, I know Linda's here too. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that we're dealing with a changing environment, and given the information that we have, I think this is our best stab at trying to improve our current situation for our students when we find ourselves with a vacant classroom from a teacher.
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate that, and I guess I would, I'm sure this goes without saying, I would encourage you all to be aggressively proactive. If you see situations where we're not filling these roles, to almost immediately come back and look for other things, because we're facing a nationwide staffing shortage in all areas, and we're finding, as you all know, that we're competing with businesses now that we probably never thought that we would be competing for labor, and we're just going to have to be very diligent to make sure that our kids are getting the resources that they need. So again, I would just encourage you to err on the side of pushing the envelope, again, from a timing standpoint, to make sure that we do this, and I know that you will, so thank you.
One of the questions that I had was, if in addition to this, there might be some need or consideration to potentially hire some additional PTS positions this year, that I would certainly be willing to consider those at the board level, if that would be helpful. If we find that we're still not able to get enough substitutes, that we, maybe need to establish some more consistent positions in order to attract enough people to make sure all of our vital functions are running smoothly. I'd be open to, as one board member, open to that discussion, as we move along. So
to serve as a floating substitute, so to speak, in other words, someone who could fill in assignments during absences of other staff, but not someone necessarily on any given day as a set assignment, but their assignment would be based upon the needs of the school or even the district on that day.
Well, or
For a
depending on
substitute,
what
for a substitute.
the need is. Like, I know that there's teachers who serve in our various tutoring centers as one of their duty periods.
Yep.
You know, so when those teachers may end up getting pulled into a classroom to sub,
Right.
that,
Could be that.
right. So there may be different positions that if it's helpful to go that route, I don't know about the,
It's
you know.
it's a flex, but I think what we're doing, what we seem to be discussing is the idea of it being a flexible assignment depending upon need of the system, and making sure that kids are not, kids are getting what they should be receiving instructionally. That there are no gaps, so to speak.
And of course, you know, that's not this decision tonight, but that's just an expression of,
Yeah.
you know, that, you know, whatever we need to do to get through this school year and have kids get where they need to be in terms of, you know, addressing the learning loss from last year, so. Laurel?
Yeah, I think this is really helpful and incorporates some of the ideas that were in the memo for the committee. We were concerned even when we last raised the rate about were we doing it enough? And I mean, those teachers fill pretty vital roles. I also liked several of the other area communities that were surveyed require people to work consecutive days to get an increase. And I think that making it cumulative instead does give people incentive to keep coming. And that's important too for the relationships they build both with their fellow staff members as well as with students. So I think
Laura.
this is good. I still like the idea of looking further at building substitutes, like pretty much permanent, semi-permanent building substitutes. I think that would be helpful as well.
Other questions or comments?
I just
Jim?
think in terms of respect that you mentioned, Bob, too, I think it's also respectful of the educational attainment of, you know, some of these substitute teachers are really quite qualified.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we're recognizing that too, when they could be working somewhere else.
Right. And, you know, we do, when somebody's in a role for 20 consecutive days, they do then get compensated consistent with our salary schedule. So it does increase from here. And that does happen around the district from time to time, so.
So, and I'm sure that this will go out to some of our lists again, like as we have in the past in terms of communicating the need for subs, right? So.
Yep, we're planning on communicating tomorrow to current subs as well as to our school community.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So if there's any parents who are watching this on CNET tonight that have time, you know, we need.
Or grandparents, aunts, uncles.
That's true, grandparents, uncles, aunts, you know, people in the community who are interested in contributing to our public schools. You know, our need for substitutes is real, so, you know, we're certainly welcome people who are interested in pursuing that, so. Okay, is there any public comment on this item? Hi, Shay. If you'd like to come up and you can introduce yourself, and then you have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, I'm Shay McGowan. I'm the president of SCAD, the Teacher Educational Organization, and I just want to thank you for entertaining this and taking this step in the right direction, because I know that we are very much short-handed in the classrooms, and a lot of our teachers that are having to do the grading and the planning are being told to cover classes because the teachers, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting them. Some teachers are teaching 3 blocks at the high school, are teaching 3 blocks a day, and then being expected to cover class. They're beginning their break. And so I do appreciate you taking this first step and addressing this concern.
Thank you. Okay, is there any other public comment or from the viewing audience? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote on this.
Ms. Bedell?
Yes.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes.
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard?
Yes.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes. Okay, that item has passed. Item D is a motion to approve an MOU regarding pandemic absence benefits for vaccinated employees with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, as shown in attachment 6D.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this? Is there any public oh, I'm sorry, Scott.
Yeah, so a couple questions. So I apologize that I wasn't able to participate in the conversation at the last meeting. For information discussion, I assume that's where this was discussed. Is there a reason that we're not including any consideration for natural immunity? For antibodies for those who have already had COVID? Just didn't know whether that was a specific discussion or...
It was, but no, it's not. We even talked to the safety team about that, but within that isn't considered the same as the vaccine.
Was there a reason that it wasn't considered?
My understanding would be there's not adequate scientific data as to the duration of natural immunity. There's been cases of individuals who have been reinfected, and you can't always track by antibody titers. That's one tool to track whether someone still has immunity, but it's not 100% reliable depending on the type of infection that you're dealing with.
I can get you the answer that actually came to us, but I don't. That sounds. It was a few months. It was probably over 2 months ago, because we did have that discussion, because with contact tracing that would have helped us with quarantines, and we did go at that with health and safety team, looking at CDC and DOH information, and we didn't get the green light to take that into consideration with our contact tracing.
Yeah, because it's both the duration and what's the word I want? The quality. So that's why it's still recommended by most physicians that even if you've had a natural infection, that you still receive the vaccine, because the quality of the immunity received through natural infection is not deemed to be necessarily a highly good quality.
Yeah, I just think that it's an omission that I would rather see included, as some recognition that there is, there are many people who choose not to get vaccinated because they have those antibodies naturally versus through a vaccination. So if we are trying to identify those people who are less presenting less of a risk of passing on COVID-19, then those individuals would be in that pool. So that's just
scientifically that's not been documented.
The question, I guess we'd have to raise the question then of how do we measure that? And how do you continue measuring it? But we've also seen with all the rise of these variants that people who have been infected with one variant are then often susceptible to be reinfected with a different variant.
Correct,
so.
and we're also seeing people who are vaccinated who are infected as well. So there's no exact science on any of this. The other question I had was on a family member's quarantine. So are we delineating between a family member who is vaccinated and not vaccinated, or just any family member?
Any family member.
Okay. Those are the only questions I have.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Brandt?
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion?
Yes?
Dr. Duffy?
Yes.
Mr. Pizarro?
No.
Mr. Leos?
Yes.
Ms. Sidney?
Yes.
Dr. Bader?
Yes.
Ms. Vidal?
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. And item E is a motion to approve an MOU regarding pandemic absence benefits for vaccinated employees with the State College Area Educational Support Personnel Association, or SCESPA, and this is shown in attachment 6E.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this? Scott?
I just reiterate the same, questions or comments relative to this. The MOUs are identical, basically.
Yeah. Laurel?
Yeah, just following up on that. I think I'm just going to restate what I think was stated earlier, which is that the vaccination is something that's very easy and straightforward to say you have or don't have. Trying to get into natural immunity would put our health staff and employees in a position of disclosing even more about their personal health status, and I don't think that's fair to either employees or our employees who work directly with ascertaining whether someone has met that standard. So that's why I'm much more concerned about doing that in terms of a privacy invasion than I am of the privacy invasion of if you've been vaccinated or not.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that, going back to what I said before, I think it's how do you measure it? And I don't think that's been established how you do that and how often you would need to measure. There's not necessarily a clear methodology for that, so. Okay, any other questions or discussion on item E? Any public comment on item E? Okay, then we'll have a roll call vote.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard.
No?
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Patel.
Yes.
Ms. Grant.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Item F is a motion to approve the amendment with Ignite for title services with the Nittany Christian and Friends Schools. And this is shown in attachment 6F.
So moved.
Second?
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion? We had a similar item related to Our Lady of Victory recently as well. Okay, is there any public comment on this item? Okay, we will have a roll call vote then.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Mr. Fazzard.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Patel.
Yes.
Ms. Grant.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes. That item has passed. Item G is a motion to approve an agreement with Stenhouse Publishers for employee professional development as shown in attachment 6G.
Leah, so moved.
Second?
Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Any questions or discussion on this item? Laurel?
This looked like a very interesting program, and I particularly liked that the suggestion came from within the staff of someone that they'd be interested in hearing from. I think it would be helpful long-term for the board to have a general, broader picture of the various, and the community of the various types of professional development we do throughout the year, of which this is just one thing, but I think especially given that it will be on Dr. Martin Luther King Day, which I've been concerned about, that our staff can't go do community service as many of our students can, that it's important that the professional development on that day pertain directly to the ideals that Dr. King espoused.
So Laurel, you're requesting like an overview of what we're doing with professional development days through the year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. I'll have a conversation with Dan as we map out CCL agendas, because I think that we have the curriculum directors who were part of this and head up a lot of our almost all of our in-service planning. Obviously, some of our in-service time is dictated by what's in contracts, in particular with our faculty. But for the professional development experiences, they head that up with principals. Obviously, in this case, Dr. Chatters is very involved. So, sure.
Okay, any other?
Thanks, Dr. O'Donnell. Thank you.
Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, we will have a roll call vote then.
Mr. Fazzard.
Yes.
Mr. Leos.
Yes.
Ms. Sidney.
Yes.
Dr. Bader.
Yes.
Ms. Patel.
Yes.
Ms. Grant.
Yes.
Ms. Concepcion.
Yes.
Dr. Duffy.
Yes.
Okay, that item has passed. Moving on to information discussion, we will be looking at policy 6 and policy 903, participation in board meetings, and these are shown in attachment 7A. And we'll have Linda Pierce at the table with us to review the discussion that we had on these in committee. So this is a first reading on proposed revisions with these policies, with the intent to make them consistent with each other and our current practices.
The specific task that was presented, your microphone, The specific task that was presented to the Policy Development Committee was to look at public participation language, the language that existed in 006 and the language in the entire policy of 903. We did do that. We had a discussion of just a couple of us, and then we took it to the full Policy Development Committee for further discussion. And now we're bringing it to the full board for discussion. Our suggestion for 006 is to simply say C903. And then our suggestion for 903 is to actually reflect our current practices, or actually they've been our practice for a couple of years, several years now, of limiting public comment to 2 minutes with the option to permit more time should the board chair decide it was appropriate.
And that the agenda on each meeting will have the minutes as well. Any feedback on the wording provided here? Laurel?
Hi. Yeah, I think, I wasn't particularly concerned about 006, other than that it talked only about deferring to a future meeting. And I think our practice of instead, when things have gotten lengthy, putting it at the end makes more sense than a whole nother meeting where it may be less relevant. But I think the idea of referring it to 903 and then having that more specific policy makes sense. My big concern here is the change from 3 minutes to 2 minutes. Again, having listened to the tape of the September 7th, I think it was, committee meeting, policy committee meeting, there was talk about 3 minutes. It has been 3 minutes since I've come on the board, even though the policy said 5, and I've thought for a long time we should make it consistent for exactly the reason that was mentioned by, I think by Amy during the committee meeting, which is that it's kind of unfair to the public to think that 5 is the usual when it's actually been 3. Even though we could always make it more than 2, I think having 3 as our baseline, we could always make it less. But having 3 is the expectation, though I will say that Mr. Buck gave an extraordinary example of someone who timed a comment of 2 minutes, got a lot into it to exactly 2 minutes. But a lot of people are more nervous when they do speak to the board, and they need a little minute to get going. And I think that we don't have that many people addressing us, that the difference between 2 minutes and 3 minutes to us is a big deal most of the time. And when we do have a lot of people, we could cut it down. I'm very uncomfortable moving it to 2 minutes. That's just very hard.
We have been using 2 minutes lately, and I'm not on that committee, but I think the discussion around it was that people generally do, that 2 minutes is generally a sufficient time. Certainly as board chair, I have not been a real stickler for cutting people off right at 2 minutes, like unless there's a long line of people to speak. I've never cut people off unless they're like, extravagantly extending the time. So, yeah, I mean, I think it really only, the 2 minutes versus 3 minutes really only matters if there's a long line of people to speak, and in which case you probably really do want it to be 2 minutes. And otherwise, it's surprising if the chair cuts people off like at 1:59. It's just, yeah. Lori?
I would say that having the policy read 2 minutes, and then when it's clear that we do not have days where we have lots of people coming, to be able to say today's meeting will be 3 minutes is probably better than having it at 3 minutes and then there's a line of people and saying we're only giving you 2 minutes, because that is a time when people probably are there because they feel most passionately, and they will then feel like we are stymieing their ability to speak by decreasing the time for that particular meeting that they feel to be so important. So that would be my argument for going for 2 and extending it to 3 for meetings like this where we don't have lines of people instead of doing it the other way around.
Right,
That's
our conversation was a minimum expectation that people would be able to come in and feel that they were guaranteed 2 minutes. And if they were permitted more, then they were permitted more. But if we took the risk of going to a larger number and then at the beginning of the meeting pulled it back, then people feel that's, you're being unfair, that they came prepared to have 3 minutes to speak, so.
Scott?
Yeah, I guess I'm comfortable with 2 minutes, and if at some point in time in the future, when I'm not sitting here on a Monday and people felt that 3 minutes was appropriate, they could do that. I would probably feel okay with 3 minutes if board meetings were actually an hour long instead of 3 hours long. And I actually wonder if we should put a board member limit in the policy versus the public, and that would really shorten the meeting, so.
Are you making a motion?
You want to talk about doing something that will help future boards?
I don't think you're going to get an argument from him.
I know Jim has a hockey game or something to watch. No, I'm kidding. Okay. Laurel?
Just to clarify, the reason I'd been so confused when I saw 2 minutes on the policy committee was that the minutes of the September meeting specifically said 3 minutes. And when I listened, so I didn't know how it suddenly became 2 when the previous meeting had been 3.
No, I wasn't at that meeting.
That was in the minutes that, of that meeting. But the other question I have, and this is a question for Dr. Etter, and I've asked it before, but I really think it's important to know. The way it's worded is that people have the opportunity to speak immediately before a vote. If there's public comment, and we then have a discussion based on what we hear from the public, can we then vote? Is that immediate enough if we talk after the public comment related to an agenda?
I think if the agenda item itself is not changed.
Okay.
So if you're going to, on the basis of your public comment, change the agenda item from A to B or whatever you're going to do, then I think you would need to allow public comment because it's changed. But if the board simply has a conversation, I know it's your practice to allow comment if there's been further board conversation, but I don't think you have to allow additional comment.
I think we may want to, when this comes back, that word immediately, I think, makes people think that it has to keep going on if there's even one comment, and that's why immediately gives that impression. And it sounds like it doesn't need to be immediately.
I think it just means that evening, yeah. Just at that part, in that part of the agenda, I think is what it means. Right. That we're still, within that item.
We could say just prior to or something like that.
Something like that, prior to, unless there's, But immediate, I think, does make people think it's like they get the last word. And yet we want to be able to comment. We've heard that people get concerned when we don't comment. Concerned we're not listening.
Okay. So maybe I would be comfortable with that changing, like just prior to, rather than immediately.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else on this policy? It's not for action tonight, so. Okay. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Moving on to item B, fiscal stewardship. We'll be looking at the annual development report, including the Ctc Education Foundation report, shown in attachment 7B. And I'll propose that we do this item and then take a quick break before the next larger budget item.
So as Randy's making his way up, I appreciate him for pulling together the development update memo, which has a variety of sources that impact the district, whether you call it alternative or non-traditional revenue sources, and really pulls it into one document. Obviously, as I had shared on the front of the meeting, appreciating what the Education Foundation continues to do and the impact they've had on our Memorial Field project and helping us out financially with that. So with that, I'll let Randy share any overview that he wants to know. We discussed this in committee, and we had members of our Ed Foundation present. This obviously, the memo has a little bit more than the Ed Foundation, the first document. And so I'll turn it over to Randy, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah, the Ed Foundation was represented at our Finance Committee meeting. They went through their presentation, which is also attached for your review. We'd just like to provide you with some additional reflections. There are over $3.2 million held at the Center Foundation on behalf of scholarships and programmatic support for the district. And there were 101,000 in distributions in the 2020-21 year. Let me just go through here quickly. The capital campaign for athletic fields, we do have commitments of 1.7 million, as I think we've talked about multiple times. Since the inception of the campaign, there have been 24 lockers committed, leading to approximately 20,000 in donations. The brick campaign, we also have had a fairly good prospect there and received quite a number of sales in that. And if you were at the football game Friday night, I hope you noticed that there were some posters up about both the brick campaign and the locker campaign. And they even include a QR code so that if someone wants to make an online donation right then and there, they can do that. So we're really excited about that, and we'll continue to. The foundation has been partnering with us on that as well. There's been the EITC as part of the foundation efforts, and we've been really benefiting from that as well. The pandemic generated over $100,000 since the spring of 2020 to help with different needs that our families have been experiencing, so we're very pleased with that. And then we continue to have advertising and signage revenues. I see that bullet point did not get updated from last report, so I need to update that, and I apologize. Primarily from the foundation perspective, the Student Opportunities Fund and the Mental Health Fund, as well as Memorial Field, EITC, those are their primary purposes that they're focusing on right now. We need to continue to work with them and help prioritize different initiatives, given the fact that we have quite a number of federal funds that we are working through spending and helping to support our students and our various programs. Right now, we need to work through that as well. Student Opportunity Grant Awards are going to be coming out. Those notices are going to go out to our members here in the next week or so. We're very excited to report that over $24,000 is going to be awarded to our teachers and staff for different programs in our schools. They've also accepted an application at a district level for some bicycle racks and additional playground equipment that we're really excited that they're going to help fund as well. Here it does say that 375 bricks to date, as well as 28 incurring in the most recent current year. And then we have the budget allocation, and actually what has been spent for foundation, and then what they've brought in over the years, both at a gross and a net amount after their any expenses that they had on their books. And so we're really excited about where this year has ended. We hope to continue to further those different opportunities. Just last week, I met with someone who is interested in helping to support some initiative in the district, and as we gain more information from that individual, we'll be passing her off to connecting her to the development officer as well to help with that opportunity. So be happy to answer any questions you have. We'll state up front that if you are looking at our foundation annual report here, and if you happen to look at some of the financials that are shared with the foundation board, if you look at, for those that look at the IRS Form 990 or any other documents that are submitted to the state, many of which are available online as well, and then you look at our annual financial report, that the finance office helps along with our auditors, the district and foundation auditors, for the annual submission. Many of those documents do not tie, and that is not something that we're trying to do to cause frustration or confusion. It's with a purpose. The financial statements are on what we call an accrual basis. So as a perfect example, we have 3 major gifts for Memorial Field that are ongoing right now, but a pledge of that nature is recorded as revenue in the year that it was pledged. So on our annual financial statement for the foundation, the almost $1 million pledge from Mr. Larry Beans would be in that financial statement, but any payments that were made from the prior 2 donors are not in revenue in the most recently completed year. They would be revenue in the prior year when they were initially pledged. So it makes it a little bit difficult for comparison purposes. The IRS Form 990 is also accrual, whereas our preliminary statements that we present are also on that accrual basis as well. But there are other statements that we need to present. Actually, the report that is being presented was presented to finance. That's more of a cash basis, so that it's easier to follow and do some comparisons, so that we don't have those pledges coming in and impacting the annual results. So just wanted to share that in case anyone has any interest in understanding that, and if anyone happens to be comparing those different reports. We'll open up for questions at this time.
Thanks, Mandy.
All right, thank you.
Are you going to go through the report itself?
I can if...
Okay. But I had some questions about it, that's why I was asking.
Okay. Nabil, can you bring up the presentation, please? The one...
You want to just
Do you want to let us know
cut
which
to your
section?
questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're the ones that I sent in
the
earlier today.
presentation. No, the
I
one
think
that says
Randy answered
presentation.
some of those by email.
Yeah.
I may not have seen that email.
Yeah, I think there was some detailed reply came
Yes, that's it, sorry. Go ahead and flip to the next slide. So their gross revenue was $485,000. Where did we go? Okay. Expenses paid...
I'm sorry, can I make a suggestion? If the rest of the board wants to see the presentation, that's fine. We saw it in finance, in one way or another in terms of the information. Laura, if you have questions, if you want to just ask your questions versus going through the whole presentation, that may be the best use of time. But if there's a reason that you want to go through the presentation outside of that, then that's fine as well. I'm just trying to, if we're just trying to answer questions, then we probably don't need to go through the details of the presentation.
Yeah, I'm looking at, because I do see the email from an hour ago, and thank you. And I can look through those and then I can follow up. I thought that the presentation was fairly concise. It's only about, I think, 5 pages, and I thought it was helpful for the community in general. Will there be an annual report such as they've done previously that's a public?
Yes, they're working on it now.
Okay, so that'll be
If it's not
out.
completed, it is almost completed.
Yeah, no, I thought it was worth just taking a quick look through because it did talk about the highlights of, not everyone goes to our committee meetings, and we don't save those, as far as I know, on tape.
Yeah, the
So.
report
But
is
it talked
attached
about
to
the
agenda.
highlights.
It's available on the agenda. It's not like it's hidden.
Okay, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do.
I think that's,
If
I would
we're
defer
not
to the
interested
chair.
in it, that's fine. And I'll get back to you if I have further questions after reading your answers. Thank you for getting back to me.
Okay. All right, so I guess any other questions?
All right, so we will take a 5-minute break and then come back for item C. Okay, we're all set.
Now, look, oh, she's, I thought she left.
I'll call the meeting back to order. We're on item C, fiscal stewardship, and we're looking at the 2022-2023 budget development process, and you can find the memo in attachment 7C.
Thank you, Ms. Concepcion. We're really excited to be here. We have a lot of work that we know and want to get done on this budget year. There's been, obviously, with the last 2 budget cycles, there's been things that we have not been able to accomplish, and we've been getting bogged down with a lot of these other things that have come at us. Honestly, the ESSER funding and all of that the funding is really exciting for us. We're happy for our local taxpayers, but and now that we have a good plan for those resources, although that is a plan and it still will probably bend and flex as many other things do, but that at least we have a trajectory that we're working towards. As we begin the discussion of 22-23, we believe that we have seen some of our key revenues take some positive turns for us. So we have updated a couple of those key factors in some initial projections, and we'll show you the fund balance impact of those here in a graph that's included in your packet. But just wanted to share with you tonight that we are working, we have a trajectory here. We talked about this in Finance Committee, I think at a fairly good level. There's also a calendar or timeline attached to your agenda item tonight to show all of the different benchmarks. And what we want to just impress upon you that it is now October, your second meeting in October, your first meeting in December. We'll be presenting to you an option to explore a proposed preliminary budget process, or take the opt-out resolution. At the Finance Committee meeting, I believe that most, if not all, board members were in favor of taking the opt-out resolution. And as we begin our preliminary budget process for us internally, not the prescribed submission to PDE, we will be looking at a real estate tax increase at the Act 1 index of 3.4%, with the hope that as we understand how the rest of this year goes and some of our factors for the out years and especially next year, we hope to be able to pull that back at least to some level. But again, just putting it out there for your full board discussion and letting the community know that we have had 2 years without a tax increase, and that we are looking at the size of a tax increase for this coming next year, and that rate of increase may be a bit higher than what we had projected previously and what you normally have projected, have assessed. If you look at Graph A on your memo, we did factor in an Act 1 index of 3.4%, as well as updated some projections on the revenue side. And if you take a look, there are 3 lines on this graph. The line that's at the top is in green, and it has a circle, I believe, of some shape. And it is the updated most recent projections with the revenue assumptions, and assumes a 3.4% tax increase. All future years are still at 2%. This has no updates to our expenditures projections. We have much work to do there, and we know that. From obviously looking at our salaries and benefits to all of our other expenses. And we, as I'm sure that you find in your personal checkbooks, that prices are rising in different ways and in different amounts. We're finding that as well. On the flip side, we're also finding that there's things that are not available anymore, just as you are probably finding that as well. So we're going to, have to factor those things in. The middle line, or the blue line, was the projection in May of 2021, and that assumed a 1% tax increase in 22-23. And then the red line, or the bottom line that has a circle or an oval as its shape, is the updated projection, but it does assume only a 1% tax increase in 22-23. So you'll see that increasing the tax rate from 1% to 3.4 really does have a potential long-term impact on us. And this graph is your committed and unassigned fund balance, factoring in the assignment or commitment to fund balance that you approved earlier this evening. So we're beginning the 21-22 fiscal year with $25 million in committed fund balance approximately. And that's in addition to the 8% or about $13 million in fund balance, unassigned fund balance, which is the cap that we're allowed at that time. So,
Randy, can I ask a question?
sure.
Sorry, I don't always process really well when I listen. So the difference between.
Especially for finance and.
I know, right? Hey now. All right, so between the blue and the red, because they're both assuming the same tax increases at the same timing, the difference is the new information that you've learned about what costs, without adding anything to our programming, but just anticipating that our costs are going to escalate because costs are going up.
And also the 2021 final expenditures and reflecting that.
Right, so whatever hits we've taken in the recent year that we now understand.
That's correct.
Great, so it's not growing our program, it's keeping everything the same, but knowing that what we're already doing is costing more than anticipated in the past.
Correct.
Great, I just wanted to summarize that and make sure I understood it properly.
And to go along with that, again, anything that's being funded by ESSER that is lost learning and new is expected to end.
Right, it's a
And
one-time.
it's not being continued on until that ESSER funding is gone.
Right.
Or it continues while we have the ESSER funding.
Right.
There is a portion of ESSER funding that is to help us with our lost revenue, and that at this point, we're assuming that all of that is in our normal programming, and that would continue.
Okay, thanks.
I appreciate the question and the clarification. I think that's really helpful, and thank you for that.
Yep.
So if we go to page 2 in graph B, again, we have the general fund balances, and we have the committed and the unassigned. And what you see here is just in a different presentation, that the smaller section at the beginning are the left part of the graph, the most current years. The smaller section is, the smallest section is the PSERS fund balance. Then the top section, or smaller section in most cases, is the green, is the unassigned fund balance. And you see that red larger section, that's the committed fund balance. And so in our projections, graphically, we're showing you that we're using up that committed fund balance. And once we kind of like played around with this by accident, I think one day, and we were just looking at different ways to present and understand, we felt that this was a real good, clear presentation for you to understand and also to share with the community. And again, we're not looking at expanding programs over this time. This is keeping our programs pretty much self-supporting. That doesn't mean that program A or expense B, whatever, is going to continue in perpetuity, but the dollar value of that would continue and be reflected. Does not mean that we wouldn't have to look at some changes in the future, and obviously we'll be doing that as well. So we're shooting for a December 6th board discussion about the proposed preliminary budget or the adoption of an opt-out resolution with a January 10 action on that. And that is the last board meeting scheduled at this point in time, once you set your board meeting dates in January, before that opt-out resolution would be required. So just wanted to put that on your radar. We'll obviously be taking advantage of every finance committee in between as well. And just today, we realized that we had a conflict, and so we would like to move the finance committee to November 17th from November 10th. That is a date of a scheduled communications meeting, so we'll have to work that out. And Lynn will be sure to communicate that with you once we make those adjustments. All right? And we appreciate your time with those changes. So is there any questions for anybody? And obviously, since we have some prospective new board members in the audience tonight, there will be a tutorial and as we have every year in this very early budget season that we are required to live by the state. And so we'll work with those new board members, as I'm sure that you will as well, but we'll work one-on-one with them to help get them up to speed as quickly as we can. But there'll be plenty of time. This initial action, obviously, is important. It's an important step, but it doesn't set a tax rate. It doesn't even determine what our expenses and how we're going to spend the revenue that we expect to receive. It's not nearly as important as the action in June.
Yeah, and doing the opt-out resolution, for anyone who's listening in, we've generally done the opt-out resolution because it eliminates a lot of paperwork for the finance office, but we still go through an extensive budget development process, just as we would if we were not opting out of some of that paperwork that we would be required from the state, if we were going to potentially pursue some of the exceptions to the Act 1 index.
Correct. And it doesn't commit you to a tax rate equal to the Act 1 index.
Right.
It just communicates to the community that you're not going above that.
Right. And we rarely qualify for exceptions to go above that anyways.
Correct.
And we don't anticipate that we would this year.
Correct.
Okay. Questions?
I appreciate the high-level roadmap. Obviously, February timeline, we see the governor's budget proposal and then all the back and forth, which is a big revenue component, although it's a smaller percentage than obviously our local revenue. It's still a very key variable in this, and usually every year down the home stretch of the budget, we're talking to our legislators just to get a sense of what the key needs are so that our plan can be informed and we don't make a mistake.
Correct.
But even though we're typically ahead of the state approving their budget.
Donna, did I miss anything?
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, Laurel?
Just a quick question. First of all, thank you to Amy, because I think I had the same question. I was hoping the answer was different and it was a color mistake, and we were doing better than we thought. But when we see the initial proposed preliminary budget in December, will that include the multi-year projections?
Absolutely.
And so we'll be able to see the projected expenses, and those will all be, at least for this preliminary one, based on maintaining our same current program. We won't be looking at possible strategies to make a change on the expense side.
Not at this point in time, no.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that.
Yep.
Thank you.
No, I think it's good clarification. This December one is, we're just finalizing the financial statements still. Obviously, we understand a lot of our projections and our results, but there's still a lot of work behind the scenes. So getting into this December timeframe is really tight for us. And obviously, we have, as we gain more information and as we are able to have meetings with you to discuss it, that's when we'll get into the greater level of detail about our budget process.
Right.
Lori, you're really going to miss it.
Right.
I know.
People shouldn't assume that means we're not addressing.
You're not wrong, Randy.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, we have committee meeting reports. The Facilities and Grounds Committee, Gretchen? Anything other than what was in the minutes?
No, nothing other than in the
Okay.
minutes.
Yeah. I saw we're moving on with the plantings.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, Policy Development Committee?
We reviewed 6 and 903, Policy 12, which we just passed tonight. We also reviewed administrative regulations for Policy 250, and we gave a first pass at 2 new policies regarding professional and student boundaries and social media. That's the nutshell.
That's a good conversation. Finance and Audit?
We went through the budget, we went through the foundation, so pretty much all covered
Substitute
here.
teacher, okay, yep. Okay, looking at upcoming meetings, on Wednesday, we have a board coffee with the community at 6 o'clock at the tent by the Delta North Building. This is an opportunity for anyone who would like to come talk with us about anything that's on their mind or to ask us questions about our work, to come out and have a cup of coffee. And then the 27th, we have a Culture, Climate, and Learning Committee meeting at 12:30, and then November 9th, another board coffee, and that will be at 7 o'clock via Zoom for those who prefer a remote option.
Yeah, sadly, you have to that's a bring your own coffee one.
Yeah, no coffee provided for that, so.
We could send you coffee emojis if you want.
Right.
the best we can do.
And there's no delivery service.
No delivery service.
You know, like GoPuff or something for the coffee at that. Okay. So board reports on intermediate unit, Dan?
Yeah, two pieces to that report. One is to just review the fact that the intermediate unit is going through their comprehensive planning process. They're pulling that document together. We've had a proposed format presented to the IU board, and at the next board meeting, we'll be presented with a more refined form of the comprehensive planning document, which will be represents more of a substantive change than over past comprehensive plans, representing the change in leadership within the intermediate unit, administrative leadership show. So I'm looking forward to seeing more of that. The second piece of information that's important, because it's really critical actually for the intermediate unit's operations. There's as you can remember, I've talked before about the fact that we, due to the failure of the previous facility, office facility, training facility in West Decatur, the structural failure, we've been working to find a facility to replace that. And at the present time, we're working on an agreement with a third party in the Clearfield County area to share facilities that are located not far from West Decatur. And so that's still in process, but we're pretty optimistic that we will have a structure which we can then renovate and bring up to speed and have available within, ideally in a year's time, but probably more like a year and a half before we'd be able to occupy it, roughly speaking. So those are the two pieces of information updates regarding the intermediate unit's operations.
Thank you. Ed Foundation report, Scott?
Yeah, we had a meeting on the 6th. Nothing major. Grant recommendations, discussion of the Memorial Field event that occurred last Friday. There is going to be a November donor event, and then discussion about the annual report that was provided to the Finance Committee last week.
Great, thank you. Okay, Jim, the Ctc Advisory Committee?
We haven't had anything since the last report.
Any CAC liaison reports? Athletics? We did have a meeting. Amy was there as well.
Yeah.
It was basically a review of how things were going with fall athletics. I don't think there was anything for the board in terms of questions. There was,
Not that I can recall.
yeah. I'm trying to remember, because I know there was a topic we talked about for a while. Related to the PIAA. No, it was related to when students are missing.
Oh, yeah.
If a student misses, for example, a wrestling match or a basketball game because it coincides with a club sport that they are also doing, whether there should be or not some kind of provision so that they aren't penalized, or that typically in those cases, say if a student is a wrestler, because this was the thing that had come up. If they miss a wrestling match, typically then they're penalized unless there was like illness or a family emergency or something that they had notified ahead of time. But if it was because
if it was about them choosing to not participate with their team in order to take advantage of a
club opportunity, like a non-SCASD opportunity to wrestle, for example. Like should there be an allowance for that or not?
It was mostly more at the discretion of it would be policy set by the athletics department, but they were asking for input from some of the community members about what their thoughts were. So it was just a healthy discussion. Yeah.
In PIAA policy, that it was the high school principal or the school principal where the decision would lie. But we had it was a discussion about sort of philosophically, like, do we want to prioritize that they're part of the team, they need to participate as part of the team. And
they made that commitment. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was most of that meeting.
Yep.
So. Facilities, CAC?
Yes, so this was, I think, the first CAC that Mike Fisher got to conduct, and so There were introductions made, and basically he reviewed the list of the summer projects that we took a look at, and fielded questions from our community members. And then there was an explanation of the process for the Mount Nittany Middle School mold moisture remediation, which I learned is called an envelope. I was highly educated at that meeting. There was, and then there was a conversation, just updates about the plans, you know, in the future for Park Forest Middle School, the update on the solar consortium. So it was really just a getting grounded, and there was an agreement at the end that the committee would meet quarterly, the second Thursday of each quarterly month.
Great. Thank you.
That's it.
Good, right? Okay, Scott, was there a finance CAC meeting?
Not that I'm aware of. There was, I did not attend.
Okay, did anyone else attend that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the timing and when, if it was since the last one. We talked about fund resolution, it seems to me, the fund piece. Sorry, it was so long ago that I'm, but yes, there was one, but not since the last board meeting.
Right.
Right.
So we just went over the fund balance resolution information and last year's financial results.
Okay, right, thank you. All right, school health and safety, has there been a meeting?
The next meeting is November 9th.
Okay. Technology?
We didn't have one, although we agreed to put an agenda item for the future one about the reviewing social media policy. And,
right.
You know, it came up in the policy committee meeting, so.
Great. Okay, then looking out at future agenda planning, we have a meeting next week that is a work session on annual goals and priorities. And then November 1st, a regular board meeting. And with that, I would like a motion to adjourn. I'm sorry, Laura.
Where will that meeting be next week?
The meeting on the 25th, is that here? Oh, thank you for, yes.
Oh,
And it will
thank you.
not, will it be televised or audio-vised or whatever the word is?
I don't think so.
Thank you. Recorded, but not live.
Live on YouTube.
It will be,
We
okay.
don't usually do that for work sessions, but
It can be.
it could, yeah. Yeah, that hasn't usually been our practice for work sessions.
It's the only live that matters.
Right.
Or the
Okay.
ESPN app.
All right. Any other questions on future agendas? Okay, and then with that, I'd like a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
So it's seconded.
Okay, all in favor of adjourning? Aye?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, then we are adjourned.